I'd like to welcome Andrew Weir, President and CEO of Destination Toronto, to the show. Andrew was named President and CEO on May 1st this year and has been a member of the Destination Toronto leadership team for 18 years, most recently serving as Executive Vice President. He has served on numerous tourism industry boards and was chair of the Tourism Industry Association of Ontario from 2021 to 2023. I want to welcome to the show, Andrew Weir. Thanks for coming, Andrew.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure, my pleasure. So, I guess what a buzz exists in the city right now. I'm sure I don't have to tell you. I know it's Taylor all day, every day, I'm sure. It's quite amazing. You have I guess we have the hottest star on the planet coming to our city for, I guess, 6 shows, right? I think three, and then there's a bit of a gap, and then another 3 shows after that. I guess last month you were speaking to the media and you indicated that with the 6 upcoming Taylor Swift concerts in Toronto, it could generate as much as 152 million in direct spending and 282 million in economic benefits. Can you provide some details around where you're getting those numbers from and those expectations?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what an opportunity we have as a city here. This is just a global phenomenon, and it really shows what the power of major events is in terms of driving visitation, driving new business, new spending into the economy. So those numbers you cited, they come from, I'll talk in a minute about how we get to it. But essentially what we're seeing is an overall economic impact of $282 million. And that's made up of the first 150-ish million, which is the transactional side. It's direct spending. So that's what visitors to the city for the concerts will spend on hotels, on restaurants, on Ubers, and on other shopping and other activities they may do while they're here. But it's the money they spend when they're here. But the good news is that money doesn't stop working just because these people then get on a plane and go home again. That's new money coming into our economy. It didn't start the day in our economy, but it ends there and then continues to recirculate. So there's another $130 million that is what we would call the induced and indirect economic impact. So for example, when we spend $100 at a restaurant on a dinner, the restaurant then turns around and respends that same money. They'll spend it on labor. They spend it on ingredients. They may hire a design firm to redesign their menus or some signage in the restaurant. That's all new spending in our economy. So that initial $100 doesn't just stop at the first transaction. It continues to work. That produces tax revenue for multiple levels of government, particularly at the federal and provincial levels. It produces labor income. So there's an enormous economic impact. And again, what's important is this is new money coming into our economy. So it's how we grow our economy. And this shows you that events are critical drivers of doing that because people travel for what they're passionate about. So when you have an event like this, it brings thousands, tens of thousands of new people into the destination and all that spending. And this study that we did just shows you what that impact looks like.
Yeah, and it's amazing how you can track that, right? I guess, you have the initial spend and then that, like you said, that $100 or whatever the spend is goes into perhaps hiring more people or, generating tax revenue for the government, et cetera. It's interesting how far it could go and how you actually can track it. Because I guess a lot of the effects are temporary, right? If you're hiring more people for whatever reason because of the amount of tourism coming into the city, I guess at some point, will those people be, is it just temporary work and at some point they will no longer be needed? To track that, how hard is it to track?
So the calculation is done using an industry accepted economic model, and it's called an input output model that measures economic impact and tax revenue generation and labor income. And it's done by a company called Tourism Economics, which is a group, the tourism unit within Oxford Economics, based out of Philadelphia. And they use this formula. So destinations around the world, particularly North America, use this to evaluate the impact of concerts, sporting events, and in particular, organizations like us use it to evaluate major meetings and conventions. We host hundreds and hundreds of major meetings and conventions every year, and it's important to understand what the value is. We know that the spending generated by those kinds of events is enormous, but the impact is even greater. So this is a well-established model that measures that. So of course, we don't track every individual transaction and follow it through, but the Oxford Economics has done a lot of work in understanding how that money flows through a system. And ultimately there is leakage, right? Some of the money eventually does leave our economy. It doesn't all stay within. But in Toronto, because we have a diversified economy, a very high proportion of that money stays within the economy. And it's one of the reasons that we took the unique approach. Other cities haven't done this in measuring things like Taylor Swift. We excluded ticket sales from the economic analysis because that money doesn't necessarily stay in Toronto. That money is going initially to the concert promoter that's not Toronto based. And then once ticket holders, once people have bought the tickets, those tickets are bought and sold a number of times in many cases on the secondary market. We don't know where that money goes. So we entirely excluded ticket sales, just like we excluded airfare. So when people fly here, we've excluded their airfare from the economic model. Now, some of that would stay here. There are jobs at the airport. There are jobs in aviation that support that, but we excluded that. So if anything, we're on the conservative side, I would think, in our modeling. But it's a fairly standard formula that's used across North America. What you can change are some of the inputs. So, how many people are coming from out of town versus local residents going to the
Right.
concerts. And again, as I said, we excluded some of the costs because our estimation is that more of those costs don't that money doesn't stay within the city. So I think it's a fairly clean look at what the economic impact really is for Toronto.
And it's incredible numbers. And we've heard people talk about Swiftonomics, right? You hear the effects all over the world. I actually had the privilege of seeing her concert over in Europe with my daughters in the summer. So great concert. I guess she's on stage for like 3 hours performing. Why do you think Taylor Swift, seems to have such a significant economic impact? We obviously many concerts throughout the year. Why is this so special? Why the big economic impact?
You know, People travel for what they're passionate about, and fandom, people that are fans, it's incredibly powerful. We see it with sports, right? We saw it when the Raptors had their championship run. We see it in with concerts. We see it with food. People travel for what they're passionate about, and Taylor Swift seems to have connected with global fans in a way that not a lot of artists have. There's something, if anything is unprecedented in her popularity, it's the direct connection that fans seem to feel with her. And that's what motivates people to travel. Now, as it relates to this particular concert tour, we have the benefit of having among the most shows of any city. I think only LA had more shows than Toronto does, also being at the end of the tour. So that means that all those people that didn't get a chance to see her and all these other stops in North America and Europe and elsewhere, they've got to come to Toronto or the final three shows in Vancouver. So, we've got 6 of the final 9 concerts on the tour. So it positions us very well because, as you said, and obviously your own personal experience, people do travel for this. People travel for what they love. And this show in particular, this tour in particular, is really motivating people to travel. And we in Toronto are very well positioned to take advantage of that because we've got 6 concerts. We're at the end of the tour. And don't forget, we've got terrific global air access too. Don't underestimate how important that is when you're trying to attract people from all over the world, again, whether it's for a concert like this or for leisure travel or for these major meetings and conventions that we host, this kind of global connectivity that we have, it's easy for people to get here from just about anywhere. So that's a competitive advantage that we have that's so important. And again, we see it in other types of tourism, but certainly that's the case in a concert tour like this. So people that want to travel to see the show here, they can.
Yeah, and being one of the largest cities, obviously in North America, that definitely, as you allude to, it definitely helps. And I'm just thinking off the top of my head, I've got a chance to see many people come to Toronto concerts. I don't recall 6 shows from anybody putting on 6 shows in Toronto. Do you recall any concert ever having the effect that Taylor Swift concerts are having? I don't remember myself. I remember back in the day, the Michael Jackson days, Michael Jackson craze when I was younger. But nowhere near, from what I remember, the craze that Taylor Swift is bringing to this city.
I don't know that there's a full precedent for this. It's exciting to see you know, Taylor hasn't come here yet, but within a couple of weeks, it'll be in the rearview mirror. So it's important to look at what's ahead as well. And then you look to next summer when you've got 4 Coldplay shows already announced. You've got Oasis coming and doing relatively compact tours, not going to a lot of cities. So for Toronto to be on that list is important. And for Toronto to have multiple shows is really important. And that that speaks to, again, some of the short-term and long-term benefits where you have in the immediate term, you've got the transactions, you've got the visitor spending that's generated and the secondary impact from those. But there's also a very important reputational lift that comes with hosting these shows. People are taking note that Toronto has 6 Taylor Swift shows and 4 Coldplay, and this is one of the cities that Oasis is coming to among a very small list. So these are that sends a signal that something's happening in Toronto. This is a market people need to watch. This is a city that people should be traveling to, and that has a very, very positive reputational lift. It helps shine a light on Toronto more broadly. The same thing will happen with the World Cup in 2 years. All of these things are very, very positive. When big things happen in a city, people take note, and this is a city that big things happen. And frankly, we should be looking for more big things to happen in the city to continue to be in that global spotlight that we know that major events can provide.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I guess turning a little bit to tourism in general, there have been some headlines I've seen over the last few years coming out of the pandemic that tourism in Toronto has been relatively flat. And has that gotten better? And obviously the Taylor Swift concerts coming now, is that the perfect timing to kickstart things if tourism has been flat in our city?
Yeah, I think I'd characterize it differently maybe and look at it this way. We obviously came out of a period for obvious reasons during the pandemic when tourism slowed way down. And for a period of time, all of our visitors were from within Canada because no one else could travel here. So the real process that we've been going through is rebuilding those more diverse markets, particularly international markets and the major meetings and conventions and business travel side. So it's just been a constant rebuild. So, how I would characterize it is we are continuing to recover and we're most of the way there. So, the good news is we're most of the way there. The bad news is we're still only most of the way there. Here we are 5 years later and still in recovery mode. So, the US market, for example, is about 85% of where it was. Again, good news is it's 85%. Bad news is it's only 85%. So, we're not growing where we were relative to 2019. We're still coming back to those levels, which was really the high watermark. But it is growth, and we are seeing return of visitors. And I think Toronto is well positioned to see continued growth in the U.S. market. The international market, looking beyond the U.S., is a little bit more of a mixed bag, where we've seen very positive return of visitors and growth out of the UK, Germany, those well-established markets. Mexico had been growing very strongly. We had quite a setback with when the federal government imposed new visa requirements on Mexican travelers. But I think that decline is largely built into the market now, and we're once again building quite strongly in Mexico. We just had a setback and now building on a lower base, but it's coming back again strongly once again. The Asian markets have been much slower in coming back. China in particular, because we don't have direct flights right now, or very few. Again, there's signs that will change in the months ahead, but a slower recovery there. And then business travel has also just been a little bit slower to recover. We've seen the demand for major events come surging back because we saw during the pandemic that you just can't replicate major meetings and conventions online. We can have a one-on-one conversation virtually like this, but those meetings and conventions and conferences that just cannot be replicated online in any meaningful way. So the demand for those has come back, but we just lost a couple of years of sales because for 2 years, the meetings that are happening in this year and 25 and 26, those were booked in 2020 and 21. And in those years, nobody was choosing Canada. Those major US groups that we're so reliant on, nobody was choosing Canada from those markets because our border was closed. So we're going to see the impact of those 2 to 3 years of difficult sales when we lost that whole pipeline. That impact is being felt right now in 24, 25, 26. So it'll take a couple of years to really all of this to work its way through the system. We've been able to put a lot of new business in, attract a lot of new business to the city, but it doesn't quite replace what was lost. So that recovery is still taking time. And I think we're on a positive trajectory, but it's going to take time for that fully to work through the system.
And hopefully, in some ways, a weaker Canadian dollar may help a little bit there. Seeing some of our neighbors from the south coming up again, so I'm sure a weaker dollar versus the U.S. dollar might help a little bit. Their dollars, and even Europe, come over here. Their dollars can go a lot longer, a lot further than the dollars down in the U.S. I thought we'd end with a question on maybe a little terminology. I know you sometimes talk about visitor economy and how it's more broad or broader than tourism. And I thought for everyone that may come across this whole idea of visitor economy, what's the difference between the two, tourism and visitor economy? Visitor economy is more broad, is that correct?
Well, I would argue they're the same thing, but I think people's understanding of them might be a little bit different. And so when we say the word tourism, many people tend to think about the leisure side of tourism. They think about people that are traveling on a vacation, maybe coming for a Taylor Swift concert or something else like that. And it's much broader than that. There are many, many drivers of tourism. People travel for a lot of different reasons, and so we've used the words the visitor economy to be more all-encompassing, but really I think you can use the two quite interchangeably. But when we talk about the visitor economy, we're talking about all the drivers of inbound visitation. And a big part of that is business travel. It's about those major meetings. It's about individual business travel, when someone needs to travel to meet with, maybe go to their company's head office or meet with their ad agency or something like that. That's part of tourism. And what we also find is that the businesses that benefit from tourism are much broader. Of course, we think about hotels and restaurants and the usual things that we as travelers tend to consume. We don't often think about audiovisual companies or or meeting planners, those or staging companies that are so critical to the major events industry, which again is such an important part of our tourism economy and our visitor economy. So we use the phrase the visitor economy to be as inclusive as possible, because the reality is inbound visitation and tourism affects so many businesses and so many people and so many communities that it's important that we use language that feels like it represents the entirety of that universe, and because it is so broad, and that you see that $282 million that Taylor Swift is generating, and the same is true, different numbers, but the same concept is true for major conventions, major sporting events. And so in order to convey the idea that so many businesses and communities and so many parts of the city and so many jobs are dependent on that inbound spending, inbound visitation, that's where the language of the visitor economy comes in. So it's really saying the same thing, but just trying to capture the full scope and scale of the impact that visitation has in our community.
Well, Andrew Weir, President and CEO of Destination Toronto, I want to thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. It's been a pleasure learning about the Taylor Swift effect, Swiftonomics. I think everyone's excited when she gets here, see her concert. As I said, I've had the privilege of seeing it already, and it's something to see. A lot of excitement. I'm sure the city will be buzzing when she's here. So thank you once again for joining us.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.